Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of The Thoughtful Entrepreneur. I am your host, Jen Amos. And today I'm excited. This person that I have today, he is known as America's favorite cybersecurity expert, Jesse Castro, who is the CEO of Freedom Managed Services. You can learn more about him and his company at the website fmsit.net. Jesse, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Jen. Glad to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. For people that are getting to know you for the first time, Jesse, why don't you just share a little bit about yourself and how are you holding up in this new normal that we're currently in?
It's an interesting time for sure. As far as the new normal is concerned, you have to make pivots, and that's exactly what we're doing right now. Mm-hmm. Being on shows like this is a pivot for me. I'm not used to doing these types of things, but it's great to do it. Mm-hmm. I've been in business for over 2.5 decades, mm-hmm. and it's an interesting thing. There's lots of things that have happened within that time frame. We'll talk a little bit about that, I guess, as we go forward here. But what we do, we're a cybersecurity company, mm-hmm. and we basically make sure that you are protected inside and out from the hackers. And I don't like to use the term MSP. You'll hear that a lot. That stands for Managed Service Provider, but we don't like to use that term because we're not. We're there to protect you, and mm-hmm. we start at the important things like your router. But we can get into some of that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely take cybersecurity experts for granted as someone who is obsessed with the internet but knows so little about it when it really comes to my own privacy and security issues. And so it'll be really interesting to get into that a little bit here. Jesse, I'm curious. So since you've been in business for 2.5 decades, has it felt like 2.5 decades for you, or has it flown by fast? You know, like, I can't believe it's been this long already.
Yeah, that's a great question because we were just having this conversation. I can't believe it's been 2.5 decades. It seems like it was just yesterday when I started the business. And I started it purely out of the context that I was able to do support for my clients better than the company that I was working with. Wow. I had no intention on actually being a business owner, so to speak. I didn't know what that meant because mm-hmm. when you start business, you start with many different hats that you don't realize. Mm-hmm. And most small businesses start out with somebody that's very technical, like I was. But you learn, the things that you learn going through this route. I mean, I've had challenges that you wouldn't believe. I always use the term that I'm a student of adversity. Mm-hmm. And adversity is a great thing. It's the best learning tool that you'll ever have. Mm-hmm. It is one of the most uncomfortable things, but if you learn to embrace that uncomfortableness, mm-hmm. you'll grow. You can't grow when you're comfortable.
Yeah, I think very often when entrepreneurs even get asked the question, you know, did you see yourself in this position like years ago, even before you started? A lot of times we'll say no, because just like what you're alluding to, you are a student of adversity. It sounds like to me, you know, you didn't get into this on purpose. It just happened as a result of you being really good at what you do.
Yeah, that's exactly right. In fact, when I started, it stems way back from when I was really young. Mm-hmm. My parents were divorced when I was 11 years old, and mm-hmm. I'll never forget, my mom told me, we're going to go get new school clothes. And mm-hmm. I was 11, I thought I was starting to get kind of cool, you know? Mm-hmm. And she bought us these pants, and I said, I'm not wearing those. And she said, well, then you go out and get yourself a job. She used other words, but she said, you go find yourself a job. I said, I will. And so I started selling a newspaper in Colorado, and I was the #1 salesperson in the state since I was 12 all the way up to 16.
Wow.
And it gave me freedoms that I didn't have. It was also my escape from all of the different things that were going on in my life. Mm-hmm. Really a good time. When I started to realize that you have to keep your nose in there no matter what. You just don't quit. And that's something that I don't use the term failure. I don't use that word at all. And because it's never failure. Mm-hmm. It's only failure if you stop. What you get is an outcome. Mm-hmm. And it may not be the outcome that you were looking for, mm-hmm. but it's an outcome. And when you start to learn that, everything is just an outcome. It allows you to go back and look at it and say, oh, I did this wrong. That's how I change. That's where that uncomfortableness comes into play. But you learn how to get around that, and you learn to start to really appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you being transparent about your upbringing and how your parents divorced at a really young age. And, your mom set some rules for you of like, hey, if you want your own school clothes, you got to get it yourself. You got to, make money for yourself. And it tells me at a really young age, you valued having a sense of control, like you mentioned, like kind of controlling like your choices and having more options. And at the time it was to start this paper route. And so yeah, I just wanted to kind of really applaud that. And, having that, I think having that work ethic at a very young age. Now tell me, for me, I didn't really start working. I was very fortunate to not start working till I was in college, till I got a paid internship and everything. But to me, it sounds like you've been working all your life, essentially. And so you have to tell me, there has to be a time in your life where you experience some kind of burnout.
Oh yeah, that burnout is a real thing, and you don't really understand what that means until you actually have it. So about 2004, 2005, the economy was just really doing well, and we were doing great. We were making money hand over fist. And in 2005, I couldn't think anymore. So I was so burnt out on work. People would come up to me and they'd ask me something simple like how to change a password. I couldn't even tell you how to do this. Like somebody erased my memory, Jen. It was the scariest thing ever.
Wow.
And I could be a husband. I could be a father. I could do everything except for work. So I'm a pilot as well. And I would get in my plane in the mornings and I would I'm in Phoenix, Arizona. So I'd fly to Tucson and I'd fly to Flagstaff, or I'd fly to Payson and I'd have breakfast. And then I'd fly back home. Then I'd come into the office and I would literally sit there for 8 hours with absolutely nothing to contribute.
Wow.
And I was so embarrassed by it that I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to handle it. So I didn't tell any of my employees. I didn't tell any of my customers. All of a sudden, they just knew that Jesse was out of the picture.
Wow.
And remember, I'm the CEO. I'm the guy I'm the face of this place.
Right.
And so they just know that I'm flying all the time. That's all they see. And the only person that really knew was my wife. And she was very supportive of it, but I was very embarrassed. I guess I was a little bit immature at that time, didn't quite know how to handle it, didn't know how to go out and look for help. And I guess that's one of the big lessons here is you always need to look for help.
Right.
But as I was going through that process, something really bad happened. And this is the adversity we talk about. One of my employees took another employee and they started their own business with $150,000 worth of my customers.
Wow.
I had no non-compete, non-disclosures. I had no idea about those things at the time. And so I went from doing absolutely nothing in 2005 to letting everybody go. I burned all of my documentation, literally, because I wasn't going to let that happen again. And I started doing everything by myself in 2006. And I did that. I think I was getting maybe 2 or 3 hours a night, sleep a night. And I did that for about 9 months and almost killed me. And then I slowly started to bring other people in, but I would give them a very specific job and that's all I would let them see. Fortunately, I have a lot of good people around me. I have a friend who's a big CEO up in Phoenix here, and he knew I was making money. He just didn't know how. And so he wanted to outline that for me. And I still have the book today. It's, it says 2009 on it and what we were doing. And he come in and he asked me for my documentation. I said, well, I don't have it, Alan. Because what do you mean you don't have it? And I said, I burned all of that.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? And I told him the story. And he said, Jesse, you have to get over this. You have to get over this. You are never going to grow. You're never going to be able to multiply yourself if you can't do this. And it took time. It took a lot of time. I don't think I came out of that whole funk until probably 2012 when I really started to do the documentation again. So I was able to sustain myself, still making 6 figures at that time by myself. But it's not about that. You can't be everything you want to be without support, without help. You have to have other people around you. And so when you go through something traumatic like that, you have to figure out what you're going to do. And that's what I had to do. When he told me those words, I said, Jesse, you have to figure this out. You need to go work for somebody else, or you need to stop what you're doing and rethink and reevaluate. Just because one person does something, it doesn't mean that everybody else is going to do the same thing. Just the same, if somebody is doing something wrong or everybody is doing something wrong, it doesn't make it right.
Right.
So yeah, it was a very fascinating and scary time. And after all of that stuff happened, this is the exciting part about this. This is where adversity is so beautiful. Because now remember, this was in 2006 that it happened.
Mm-hmm.
In 2016, I'm growing again, really starting to grow. Mm-hmm. We're now across the country. We have clients in Canada and all of the United States. And I get a phone call. I'm in Disneyland at the time with my family, and I kept the number of the person I'm talking about. I told you mm-hmm. that took my clients and started his own business. Mm-hmm. I kept his phone number in my phone, and my wife, I show her who's calling me. I do this, and she says, "You're not taking that call, are you?" Mm-hmm. I said, "Well, yeah, I am." Mm-hmm. And so I get on the phone with him, and the very first question I ask him is, "How's your wife?" And he says, "We're not married anymore." I said, "Okay, good. We can continue to talk." But wow. Listen, I'm in California. I'm at Disneyland with my family. When I get back, I'll call you. So we come back. I come back from the trip. I call him back up, and we start talking. He says, "Hey, I've been wanting to call you for a long time. I've been scared." I said, "I understand that." Mm-hmm. He apologized. And we start talking, and he says, "I see that you're really moving across the country." Well, this time, of course, I have non-competes, non-disclosures, and all these other things.
Yeah.
And I knew what the real problem was. I knew the problem wasn't just him. And we talk today, and I'll say something. Remember when we did this? And he'll have no recollection of it.
Wow.
He was in a really seriously poor relationship, and this is something that most people don't understand and don't know. Mm-hmm. When you work with somebody that's at a high level, you really need to understand who else is involved in that relationship. And so the very first thing that we did when he came back is I said, "Hey, we need to go to dinner. I'd like to meet your new wife." We did, and she's fantastic. I love her to this day, but he's now my IT director again.
Wow.
And so people say, "Well, why would you do something like that?" I said, "Because everybody makes mistakes. We're human."
Yeah. Wow.
It's what you do and how you respond to that matters.
Yeah,
that's adversity.
I think that's just very, very big of you and very admirable of you to do that, because that individual traumatized you, and it took you years, to really overcome that, to be where you are today. And it just shows your own personal growth to be able to pick up that phone and have a conversation with him. And I think it's very humanizing of you to ask him, "How's your wife?" Because I think very often in business, we don't talk about the personal life. It almost seems like work takes over like everything else comes second. And a lot of the times that's the spouse. And so I think it's really powerful that you did that. And I think to other entrepreneurs who are in a high position or business owners, I think it's very important for them to reevaluate that and understand that it's not just you that's up there, but it's the person that's supporting you. And in many cases, it's your spouse, it's your wife. And so I find that very profound, that you brought that up, because I feel like even in a conversation like this, I wouldn't have expected you, bringing that up and asking that question to now, once again, your IT director.
Yeah, and you have to go back and evaluate. That's the beauty of looking at things from a different perspective. When things are really, really challenging, what did you do that was different? What could you do this time that will make it better? Mm-hmm. And I knew right away where that problem came from. Mm-hmm. And so as the time went on and I started to get myself back together, I knew that he wasn't going to make it. And I knew that because I know him on a very, very professional level. Still to this day, I have never had a professional relationship like I have with this guy. We complete each other's thoughts. Now, I'll also say this. I also make it a policy that I do not become friends with any of my employees because that makes things very, very challenging. You start to hang out with these people. There are things that are implied that you don't necessarily want them to have or know. And they'll feel like you're left out. And well, what is this guy doing? Why isn't he letting me in? I thought we were friends. This is a working relationship. And we have the greatest working relationship. and that's where it will stay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fantastic. It just, I'm really just thinking about how big it was of you to do that, and that I think anyone in that situation would have maybe villainized him and would have just said the worst about him. But not only have you, not only have you seen the bigger picture and really understand his story and what he was struggling with, but you both are really close with each other and can finish each other's sentences, as you said, today. And so it's just a very admirable thing. And I think it's a reflection of you and your character. And I can only imagine, the reason why your business is successful as it is today is a result of, the adversity, like you said, being the student of adversity, and really just owning that and being, owning that and learning from that. So thank you so much for just taking the time to share that, because I think that it's important for business owners and entrepreneurs to know that this life, for a lot of us, and I'm a millennial, I think about people my generation who have not been in business for as long as you have, may not have experienced that yet. And I hope that with this show and sharing your story, they'll be able to, keep that in mind, and also, have better documentation in their business.
Yes, you definitely need to have the documentation. Without it, you're going to be in trouble. But there's lots of other things that happen. One of the things I'll say that happened to us just recently is we'll let a client go. And I'll tell you, Jen, this was a really, really tough decision for me to do, but I had to do it. They're very, very large, and it was $250,000 worth of my revenue.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
But I had to let them go because they were growing exponentially, and I had warned them. We hadn't raised their prices in some time, and that was my fault. Mm-hmm. But they also knew what they were doing, because they wouldn't talk about it every time I wanted to bring it up. Mm-hmm. And the reason they didn't is because they knew exactly what they were doing. And anytime that happens, it strains what's going on. So you cannot fix a problem. And your audience needs to know this. If you're starting out and you're in 5 figures, don't just take any client out there, because you're going to get somebody. I'll give you a quick example. We do what is called MRR, monthly recurring revenue. And if you have somebody that's paying you $500 a month, it's going to take you 100 plus 115 customers to get to $1 million in revenue. And I don't know if you know this, or if you do, great. If you don't, I'm going to let you know. Only 4% of all businesses in America ever reach $1 million in revenue. Small businesses. And that's a big statistic. And there's reasons for it. It's because of what I'm talking about. You'll take a small customer and you'll let them pay you $500 a month. The problem with that is in my case, in the IT field, I have to have 17 technicians now. So my profit margins are drastically reduced. So instead, what you have to learn is, where is your target? Who are you going after? You have to really niche down, or niche as they say in Canada, to figure out who you're talking to and how you're going to go about that. So since that, I used to do that. And I'll tell you, there was a time where I had 15 employees and we made money hand over fist, or so I thought. That year, Jen, I brought home $20,000.
Wow.
For myself. Everybody else got paid.
Yeah.
$20,000. So you have to go back and reevaluate. That's why I say adversity is so cool. It's such a blessing. It's such a beautiful thing. Yeah. Because then you go back and you realize, oh, I see. Well, now what happens if you take and you start bringing people in and they're paying you $2,000 a month? People say, well, I can't fathom that. Well, they will. I promise you. You have to be confident enough to go out there and make it happen.
Yeah.
Now you only need 30 customers, between 30 and 38 customers to make $1 million in revenue. Now, if it's at $5,000, you need 17 customers to make $1 million in revenue. Now, if I'm doing that, I go from 17 technicians down to 1. Now my profit margins are increased incredibly, aren't they?
Absolutely.
So yeah, those are things that you really need to think about when you're going through and doing this. So if you have a $30 product, you're going to sell a whole heck of a lot of those to get to that $1 million in revenue. And that should be cool. That's a magic number. You can make $800,000 in revenue, still not like making $1 million in revenue. Once you hit that $1 million mark, there's a change. And then that struggle begins again, because now you have to start bringing in management, and they're always more expensive than everybody else. That's probably for a different show.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you for elaborating on that. Because I think when entrepreneurs initially get into business, they think often about their price, but they don't think about like the overall, what do you call it, return on investment for putting that price together, or the long term of like, oh, how many clients do I need to have in order to earn a certain income? I think they're just a lot of, especially starting out, they're just happy that they have clients, right? And so I think in what you described, it really paints that picture for someone who is planning on being in business long term, and more importantly, wants to work smart and have lower overhead so you can have higher revenue. Speaking of niche or niche markets, why don't we talk just really briefly about your company, Jesse, Freedom Managed Services. And I know that you work with small to mid-sized businesses. Tell me specifically, maybe what is a perfect client that you have the fortune of working with?
Yeah, so the perfect client for us is somebody that's typically in a school, in the education sector or in the healthcare industry. And they typically have been in business for anywhere between 10 and beyond years. And they also have 15 computers or more inside the organization, which takes us to that $2,000 mark that we talked about. So I don't typically work with people that have less than that. And that's the reason why. Because I need to be profitable. And I also need to be able to be the best at what I do. And that's why they call me America's favorite cybersecurity expert, because you can devote that time to these people when you have less customers paying you something that is where it should be, instead of having, I'll tell you, this is just the truth, and I don't know how else to say it. It's very challenging to work with new businesses. And the reason for that is because of what you said just a second ago, Jen. They're just happy to have customers. Okay. And when you do that, they don't know what they don't know. And so there's a tendency to put blame on somebody. And I'll tell you, IT people, they are the most loved person in the company and the most hated person in the company all at the same time. And it happens all the time. And nobody ever wants to think about what happens. I mean, we'll plan to go on a vacation, right? You'll think about all the things you're going to do there and what you're going to do and how you're going to spend your time, right?
Oh, absolutely.
You won't plan to do that for your network. So if I were to say to you, Jen, hey, there's a 3-day weekend coming up. Wouldn't that be fantastic if you were able to go on this vacation because you're the director of IT and you didn't have to take your phone because you knew it was going to be taken care of 100%?
Oh, that'd be a dream come true.
Right. Those are the people that I talk to.
Yeah.
Those are the people that matter to me. It's not about what we do. It's not about, yes, of course, it's the security. It's keeping everything up and running. But it's about making sure that you, as my customer, get to do the things that you want to do outside of the workplace when you want to do them and not have to worry about what is going to happen because we have it under control. Fantastic.
Jesse, I feel like you can provide wisdom all day. Of course, all good things should come to an end. Why don't you just share with us just some closing thoughts, maybe some final tips of wisdom that you want to share with our entrepreneurs and small business owners that are listening to The Thoughtful Entrepreneur?
Well, like I said before, one of the things that you should never, ever do is let the word failure come into your vocabulary. Nothing is ever failure. It's an outcome that you weren't looking for. But it's a way to go back and look and say, hey, you know what? That's great because now I know how to fix this.
Yeah.
The other thing I can tell you is never, ever settle. Don't settle because things that settle always go to the bottom.
Wow. That is figurative and literal. Jesse, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. Again, to our listeners, if you want to be in touch with Jesse, he is the CEO of Freedom Managed Services. You can learn more about him and his company at fmsit.net. Jesse, thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure having you today.
Thank you, Janet. My pleasure.